Mr. President, I also have 11 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of both the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed on the record.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that time during the quorum calls be charged equally to both sides.
Without objection.
I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I appreciate my colleagues' views and discussions on this important issue, the issue of immigration. We are
in a quorum call.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So we have before us a 1,000-page bill that's extremely difficult to read and to understand. We're being asked to vote on it, and I would just say that Majority Leader Reid indicated that he wants to list amendments, and presumably no more would be agreed to, and he's going to pick and choose which ones he would approve by the end of this week. And I believe that's very premature. I do not believe that that's the way we should be proceeding, and we've got to have the time to sufficiently analyze all the complexities that are here. I have to say to my gang members who produced this bill, this tome, that you spent months working on it with special interest groups and lawyers and the Obama administration staff people, and you produced a bill, and now we have to rush it through the Senate. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. Let me just read from one of the sections in the bill. And I hope my colleagues know this. If you've begun to read the bill, you know how hard it is, colleagues. This is not an easy bill to read. And you have to study it. And you have to have lawyers reading it. And you have to find out what the exceptions are and what the limitations are and what the additions are. The lawyers who wrote it know. The Gang of Eight doesn't know, I assure you. They don't know all the details that are in this legislation. It's not possible for them to do so. So people who are writing at this special interest group, the union group, the business groups, ag business groups, meat packers group, the La Razas, the Immigration Lawyers Association, all of them were in the thing working on it. They know what the impacts are. But how about this section right here from the guest worker section? Subparagraph paren capital B. Numerical limitation. This apparently has to do with the number of people that would be admitted. Subject to paragraph D, the number of registered positions that may be approved by the Secretary for a year after the 4th year, referred to in paragraph paren 1, paren A, paren Roman numeral 4, shall be the equal of, get this, subparagraph 1. The number of such registered positions available under this paragraph for the preceding year, and subparagraph Roman numeral 2, the product of, subparagraph 1, the number of such registered positions available under this paragraph for the preceding year multiplied by, subparagraph 2, the index of the current year calculated under subparagraph C. Now, you think that's easy to understand? But it has meaning. And what it basically means is this bill is going to allow more workers to come into this country than we've ever allowed before at a time when unemployment is extraordinarily high, our ability to reduce unemployment is down, wages are down, and we are falling below, our workers are falling below inflation rate in their wages for years. And how about the second paragraph? I'm just reading this. So we're going to rush this thing through, really? Subparagraph capital C, index. The index calculated under this subparagraph for a current year equals the sum of, subparagraph Roman numeral I, 1, 1/5 of a fraction, subparagraph 1, the numerator of which is the number of registered positions that registered employers applied to have approved under subsection E1 for the preceding year, minus the number of registered positions approved under subsection E for the preceding year, and subparagraph 2, the denominator of which is the number of registered positions approved under subsection E for the preceding year. And I'm sure we all got that. I'm sure you know exactly what that means. And it goes on. Subparagraph Roman numeral 3, 3/10 of a fraction. 3/10 of a fraction. Subparagraph 1, the numerator of which is the number of unemployed United States workers for the preceding year minus the number of unemployed United States workers for the current year. Subparagraph 2, the denominator of which is the number of unemployed United States workers for the preceding year. And it goes on, subparagraph 4, 3/10 of a fraction, it goes on. So somebody knows what that means, because you had special interest on top of writing this big monstrosity. They were there. They wanted their deal. And I would say to my colleagues, when you say, and those in the Gang of Eight, and I know they want to do the right thing and have worked hard, but they got off on the wrong track. The papers reported for weeks, well, the unions are here and the Chamber of Commerce is here and the ag workers and ag industry people are here and they want more workers for this and this one's demanding more workers for that. And our senators over here somehow letting them all hammer it out. And that's how this writing comes up. That's how it came from them. The senators didn't write this. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were putting in numbers to get certain workers that businesses wanted so they can have more employees and they can keep wages down. That was what the scheme was. More workers, less competition for labor, loose labor market, less pay raises, less overtime, less benefits, because the employer has options. And remember, these are guest workers. These are people not on a citizenship path. They're not here to form corporations and hire millions of people and cure cancer. These are workers that come in and work for existing corporations. And I just would emphasize that some thought needs to be given to that. We haven't talked about that yet. We're going to talk about it. The impact of this large of an increase in immigration into our country has real impacts. And a lot of the numbers and a lot of the data that's out there has not been challenged. And the data indicates that we're already at a point where the flow of immigrant labor into America is depressing wages. And it's a big factor in the cause of workers' wages today, being 8% in real terms below what they were in 1999. Wages haven't been going up. Democrats used to talk about it. They used to hammer President Bush on it all the time. Now that President Obama's been in office for 5 years, you don't hear him talking about it anymore. Nobody's talking about it. Well, Senator Sanders talked about it on the floor last week. I give him credit for that because he's an independent. But I haven't heard my Democrat colleagues continue to repeat the fact that steadily we're seeing a decline in wage rates in America, making it harder for middle-class Americans to get by. And what about even find a job? So the matter is not a little bitty matter. we're going to have to talk about this. And we don't need to rush this through. It seems quite clear to me, crystal clear to me, that the Gang of Eight never discussed this. They certainly didn't call Professor Borjas at Harvard. Dr. Borjas is a leading expert on immigration and labor and the impact of it in America. He's written books on it. He says that I believe 40%, I believe it was his study, of the fall in wages for American citizens is attributable to the current flow of immigrant labor into America. It pulls down wages. It's free market. You bring in more cotton into America, the price of cotton falls. You bring in more labor, the price of labor falls. That's the way the market forces work. And he says this is a factor right now, but we need to understand that if 15 million people are legalized virtually immediately, and the guest worker program appears to double in the number of people that will come in, and the immigrant flow, permanent immigrant flow of people who want to become citizens will increase 50%, then we'll have one of the largest increases in flow of labor to America we've ever seen, and we can't get jobs that are decent pay for American workers right now. That's real out there. People are worried about their families. They're worried about their children's ability to get a job. They're worried about their grandchildren's ability to get a job. They're about to graduate from high school. They don't have a college degree. Maybe they don't plan to go to college, but they're willing to work. Jobs are not that plentiful. Did you see the article in Philadelphia, I believe it was, that they said they had job openings to try to help people who've had a criminal conviction in their background. They expected 1,000 people. 3,000 showed up. They had to cancel it and reset the whole deal because they interviewed people who said, you can't find a job in Philadelphia. And I believe in New York, one of the boroughs of New York, there was a very interesting article just 2 weeks ago about job openings for elevator mechanics. People waited 5 days. They took tents out to stay in line to try to get those jobs. The number of people waiting in line was 20 times the number of jobs that were out there or more. And so we're going to reward people who entered the country. We have to understand in this bill right here, these people, if the bill is passed, the people who've come here, that have been, many are in the shadows, and that's correct, and that's a sad thing, and it's a difficult thing. But those individuals also will be able to go apply for the elevator mechanic job. They'll be also able to compete for employment in Philadelphia that right now they may not be so able to contribute. So it raises real questions. I would want to mention this. This is this Saturday, from the Washington Post. You heard that there was a good job numbers, right? Well, the job numbers weren't really so great, it appears to me. 175,000 jobs were created last month, according to the Washington Post, based on the new government data that was released Friday. And the Labor Department said unemployment went up from 7.5 to 7.6. So unemployment rate went up even though the number of jobs was 175,000 created. But what I want to point out is this fact that's in the report, and I'll quote from the Post. Quote, the bulk of the gains in May were in service industry, which added 57,000 jobs. Still, about half of those were temporary positions. Temporary positions, not real jobs. And I continue, suggesting that businesses remained uncertain of consumer demand. Missing from the picture were production jobs in industries such as construction and manufacturing. Those weren't the kind of jobs that are being created. Meanwhile, manufacturing shed 8,000 workers. American manufacturers reduced employment last month. And those are the better jobs with the retirement pay and with the health care benefits that come with a good manufacturing company. So we're creating more and more competition for lower wage jobs. The article goes on to say this. In addition, some economists have raised concerns about the types of jobs being created. Sectors such as retail, restaurants, bars have been adding plenty of jobs, but those positions tend to pay low wages. Friday's report showed workers' average hourly earnings rose only 1 penny in May to $23.89. For the entire year, wages have risen 2%. Again, that's below the inflation rate. So again, we continue to have this situation in which wages trail inflation, which means the average American is having a hard time to get by, and many of these jobs are part-time, not permanent. And they're the kind of jobs that a lot of people would look to advance from, whether working in a restaurant or something like that, and they'd be looking to move forward. And the kind of construction, the manufacturing jobs we'd like to see more of are not there. So I mentioned the work visas in this process. Despite a huge increase in the numbers of those that are going to be legalized and put on a path to permanent residence and citizenship, we have a large number of people in this total number. All right, for example, under the bill, it's widely conceded that we would legalize 11 million people. They would be put on a path to legal permanent residence and then the citizenship. 11 million, all of whom entered the country illegally and are here in violation of the law. What's not mentioned is that there's another 4.5 million that's in they call it a backlog status. They're basically chain migration members, family members who want to come, but under our current law, you have a cap, a limit on how many family members are allowed to enter each year, and as a result, the backlog, they call it, is moved up to 4.5 million. So now we have people say this. They've been saying, well, you shouldn't give the 11 million here illegally advantage over people that have been waiting in line. That was a problem for the Gang of Eight. And I can just see them sitting around dealing with that. How can we give somebody who was here waiting in line patiently and lawfully a status behind that of somebody who's been here working in the country with false documents illegally? That wouldn't be right. So how do they solve that? Like Washington does, they just legalize them too. They didn't want anybody to say the 4.5 that's here waiting in place. They could keep, so they just let them come in too. So really, we'll be initially processing 15 million people. And then, well, what about the annual future flow? Now it's the most generous flow in the world. We admit 1 million people, a little over 1 million people a year under our legal flow into the country. What about that? In light of all this accelerated admissions and legal status, what's going to should we reduce the number of people that are coming here each year lawfully now for a while? Oh no, that's increased. 50% according to the Los Angeles Times. It could be more. I'll accept that number. So that's, instead of 1 million a year, that's 1.5 million. Over 10 years, that's 15 million. So that results in 30 million people in 10 years being given lawful permanent status in America. Lawful permanent status in America. 30 million. 10% of the entire population of America. And overwhelmingly, this group is low-skilled. Over half of the people here illegally don't have a high school diploma from their own home country. and they're not able to take the better jobs, they'll be competing with, for the lower wage jobs in America. And if they're legalized, legal immigrants who entered the country a few years ago, they're going to find that some way or another, maybe they were legalized in 1986, maybe they've come legally since. But that immigrant population is going to find their wages pulled down by this large amount of flow of labor into the country. I just don't think there's any doubt about that. We'll go more in detail about that as we go forward. But we're talking about 30 million be given legal status on a path to permanent legal residence and citizenship over the next 10 years. They'll be given that status. And we've not discussed that. So I asked Senator Schumer at the committee twice, how many will be admitted under your bill? He refused to answer. I'm not sure they know, because these numbers aren't all the numbers. There's an additional group of people who will come under the chain migration theory, the family-based connections, and other special provisions in here that have no caps, no limit on how many would come. So he refused to answer. The sponsors that are producing legislation for us today will not say, amazingly, how many people they expect to enter into our country if their bill passes. Why not? You don't know, or you won't say. Either one is an indictment of this monstrosity. And that's why it cannot pass. Even Senator Rubio is now saying he can't vote for the bill unless it's improved. He was in the Gang of 8. This is legislation that is a flawed legislation, fatally flawed, and it should not become law. It just not. It shouldn't. And they've said a lot of good things about what they expect the bill to do. If it did those things, we could be more interested in it. And we could see, we'd have a framework that, we'll have a framework for a bill that could actually do some good. I would say that for sure. As we go forward, we need to ascertain with absolute clarity what the best economic data shows about how many people this country can absorb in a reasonable way and be able to provide a decent place for them to work, and without pulling down the wages of an already stressed American workforce. We need to talk about that. So far as I can tell, that was never discussed in the groups. What was discussed pretty much in the groups, it seemed to me, was businesses demanding more workers, La Raza demanding more people, and basically open borders, and they were the ones writing the legislation in large part. There were some union objections to some of this, and it needs to be listened to. Republicans say, well, that's a union objection. Well, they make a good objection, so be it. I think they made some points, but went along with this in a way that's not effective. So we've got to talk about the economic impact of it, and we will, and we need to ascertain the second aspect. The 30 million people I've just mentioned, those 30 million are people who come permanently. They're on a path never to return to their country. They have a legal status that allows them to get legal permanent residence and then get a citizenship. Normally, as I say, we do 1 million a year, which would be 10 million over 10 years. This will increase it to 15 million over 10 years, and that doesn't count the 11 million plus the 4.5 million that will be given legal status. So it's pretty clear to me, it's indisputable that we're at 30 million people put on a path to permanent residence in America. And I ask my colleagues if they have a different number, they should share it with us. maybe, in these bills with these subparagraphs and this numerators and denominators and fractions and all, they got a different number. I'd like to hear it. We think we've figured it out. The Los Angeles Times agrees. Other analysis I've seen to agree with it as best we can do so in the time since the bill was introduced. Then you've got the worker programs. And that's what I was reading about earlier. Let me mention those programs. These are programs in which have generally been referred to as the guest worker programs. We believe, and I think data shows, that the bill doubles the number of guest workers that will be allowed into the country. Every year, we bring in a certain number of people. Some work in agriculture, some work in landscaping, some work in other things. At a time of high unemployment, with Americans doing landscaping, Americans are working in meat packing plants and doing farm work. But temporary, seasonal jobs are often hard to fill, and guest workers can do that. And I'm not opposed to a guest worker program, but at this point in history, should we double the number on top of the 30 million I just mentioned? This is an annual flow on top of that. For example, it adds 4 times more guest workers in the 2007 bill that the American people and Congress rejected. 4 times the number of guest workers in that bill. At a time when 20 million more Americans are on food stamps today than in 2007, when teenage unemployment is 54% higher and median household income is 8% lower than in 2007. So we're so desperate now, we've got to bring in twice as many guest workers. Where are they going to find work? Are we going to disappoint them? What if they can't find work? Will they then be able to say, well, I'll work for minimum wage? And the American young guy, he's 20, likes to do some work. He's got a child perhaps, trying to get that job and get started and learn a skill as a carpenter or bricklayer or construction or equipment operator. Will that make his ability to find the job harder? What if the young guy had a drug offense? I used to be a federal prosecutor. You don't want to see just because somebody got arrested and prosecuted for drugs, they can never get work again. Who's going to take care of them? We know this. We know that if people don't have a job, the government has transfer payments, food stamps, Medicaid for your health care, housing allowances, and other benefits. So is that how the taxpayers now have got to have even more people subsidized by the government because they honestly can't find a job? There's not enough out there. And so my colleagues need to focus on this. And there's been almost no serious discussion about it other than what we hear from certain squeaky-wheel special interest. But how many of our colleagues know the difference between the H-1B visa, the H-1B1 visa, the H-2A visa, the H-2B visa, and the H-4 visa? And how many will come in under each one of them? And what standards will they use? And do you actually have to make sure you've advertised and offered a job to an American first before you use this visa? And those are just the H visas. What about the W-1 visa, the W-2 visa? And the W-3 visa? And you also have the E-3 visa, the E-4 visa, and the E-5 visa. And you've got the X visa and the Y visa, and it goes on and on. And that's how we've got a doubling of the number of people that are coming in under the guest worker program. So our sponsors have spent 4 months bringing this up. Clearly, they should have spent much more time because the bill is fatally flawed. The only thing that clearly works in the bill The only thing that guaranteed to work is the amnesty. It's guaranteed that people, once this bill passed, people that are here illegally will be given legal status. They will then be placed on a path to citizenship and legal permanent residence and then citizenship. That's what's guaranteed. And all we have, as in the past, as in 1986, a promise that we'll have enforcement in the future. And I have to say, we've been around here, a lot of us, for several years, and we know that that's not going to work. This promise is just that, a promise. We don't have the background, the backing to make it sure. Senator Cornyn's got an idea that he thinks will strengthen that, and I know it will strengthen it. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts. I know Senator Cruz is on his way. Okay. So Senator Cruz, I know, was here, but he's now in the Judiciary Committee dealing with some other important issues, of which I'm glad that able lawyer is there. And I'm sure he'll be speaking later. Mr. President, how much time is left on this side?
There is 17 minutes.
So Senator Cornyn indicated that the bill fails with regard to enforcement and enforcement at the border. I could not agree more. Senator Cornyn in 2007 spent a lot of time working on this bill. He proposed an amendment then that would have improved the border enforcement, and he's an expert at that. He's a senator from Texas. He's wrestled with this over the years, and he should absolutely be listened to. But we also know this, that people that are out there every day enforcing the law are telling us that the system is not working and that changes and improvements need to be effected. And they are concerned that this bill doesn't do it. Mr. President, the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office on June 10th, North Carolina, issued a news release. More than 75 North Carolina sheriffs warned Congress that the Senate immigration bill would endanger public safety. Well, that's a pretty serious matter. They say this, quote, "In a short time, over 75 sheriffs from across North Carolina, serving counties both big and small, across this great state, have signed the attached letter opposing the current Senate immigration plan. Quote, our first responsibility and highest duties as sheriffs is to provide for the safety of the citizens residing in our communities where we serve. Unfortunately, this flawed immigration bill, which was produced by the Gang of 8 senators, puts the public safety of citizens across the United States at risk and hampers the ability of law enforcement officers to do their job." Close quote. They go on to say this Senate bill should be opposed by lawmakers, and instead Congress should work with law enforcement on reforms that we already have and we're willing to propose that will enhance public safety. Close quote. Kenneth Palinkas, American Federation of Government Employees, president affiliated with the AFL-CIO, wrote this letter. There has been much public concern over the fact that the legalization occurs prior to any border enforcement. Indeed, from what I understand, every amendment offered in committee which made legalization contingent on achieving border security first was defeated. History tells us that future promises will not be kept and that our border agents will be left high and dry by the executive branch as they have so many times before, regardless of who writes the plan, close quote. This is the head of a federal employees union. It represents law enforcement officers. I think the biggest one. He goes on to say, but even if you completely rewrote your proposals to resolve the many border security concerns and change the ordering to delay legalization, the legalization would still fail and would still endanger public because of the fatally flawed interior enforcement components, close quote. He goes on to say, quote, if passed, 744, that's this bill, would lead to the rubber stamping of millions of applications for both amnesty and future admissions. He goes on to say, why should the Senate pass a bill that makes it even more difficult for the USCIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Officers is who they are, to identify, remove, and keep out public safety threats, people that are dangerous, that maybe they're in trouble criminally in their home countries. What do you do if you're about to go to jail in another country in the world? Well, if you can flee the country and get to the United States, that's not a bad thing. And we are seeing, over the last decade, more criminals as a part of the mix with very fine and decent people who come to the country because they are, in effect, fleeing maybe prosecution in their home countries. What about the ICE officers, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Council? And they wrote a letter with Pennsylvania sheriffs, the North Carolina sheriffs, and sheriffs nationwide on May 29th. And they say this, Congress can and must take decisive steps to limit the discretion of political appointees and empower ICE and Border Patrol to perform their respective missions and enforce laws enacted by Congress. This is a bold statement. These people work for the President of the United States, or at least as part of the administration. The ICE officers have already voted 2 years ago no confidence in their supervisor, John Morton, because they say he spends more time dealing with pro-amnesty groups and directing them not to enforce the law than doing his duty. They've actually sued Secretary Napolitano and Mr. Morton for blocking them from executing plain congressional mandates that they feel they have no other obligation than to enforce. They have to do it, but they've been told not to do it. They say this, rather than limiting the power of those political appointees within the Department of Homeland Security, S. 744 provides them with nearly unlimited discretion, which will serve only to further cripple the law enforcement missions of these agencies, close quote. I've talked to these officers. They asked to be a participant with the Gang of Eight in writing this thing, and they were refused. They asked repeatedly. They warned that this was going to not work. They never wanted to hear from the people who enforce the law every day. They wanted to hear from the amnesty crowd. That's who they met with. They wanted to hear from the big business guys who want more labor, cheap labor. And that's who wrote the bill. But he didn't listen to the people who deal with this, who put their lives on the line. So this letter continues. While business groups, activists, and other special interests were closely involved in drafting S-744, law enforcement personnel were excluded from those meetings. Immigration officers, state and local enforcement, working directly with the nation's broken immigration system, were prohibited from providing input. As a result, the legislation before us may have many satisfactory components for powerful lobbying interests and other special interests, but on the subjects of public safety, border security, interior enforcement, this legislation fails. It is a dramatic step in the wrong direction, close quote. That's a pretty resounding condemnation. And I think that's fundamentally correct because I met with them. I asked a group of people to meet with them. They wouldn't do it. participants in the recent Participants in recent calls include, to discuss this bill and how to promote it, include the heads of Goldman Sachs, the Business Roundtable, Evercore, Silver Lake, Centerbridge Partners, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as well as the heads of Washington trade groups representing the banking industry, such as the Financial Roundtable. They all had input into it. They all were involved. I guess they made contributions or something. Thomas Hodgson, Sheriff of Bristol County, on June 10th, wrote this: "No immigration reform without legitimate without legitimate security." He's from Massachusetts. I believe that's Sheriff from Massachusetts. He said, quote, "I have grave concerns about illegal criminals being eligible for citizenship and gang members being permitted to qualify for the provisional status, registered legal status, once they renounce their affiliation. Most troubling, however, is the fact that we do not have adequate systems in place, such as biometrics, to verify identification for people entering and leaving the United States. Announcing that biometrics will be available at our 30 busiest airports serves only to limit illegal entry at those locations, diverting illegal entry to those locations without the superior technology," close quote. "I ask you to make it known to your senators and representatives that they vote no on passage of 744 until a security plan is in place," the sheriff says. Pete Nunez, former United States Attorney in San Diego, wrote this. Great United States Attorney. I had the honor to serve with Peter Nunez. He said this, quote, but of greatest concern is the so-called trigger that we are told will delay the path to citizenship until the border is secure." That's what they're saying. We've got this thing in place. Until you guarantee the border is secure, the legalization doesn't happen. And as we've demonstrated already, that's absolutely ineffective. So Mr. Nunez goes on to say, "This is an illusion meant to fool the public into believing that amnesty will only take place after the border is secure. Nothing could be further from the truth, because on day one, every one of the 11 million illegal aliens will be eligible for a temporary document allowing them to stay and work in the United States. Their two most important goals," close quote. So he was the United States Attorney on the California border, and he worked with these issues and understands it. He had the responsibility of prosecuting cases by the thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, frankly. Former United States Attorney Nunez is a very wise and experienced person. Pinal County Sheriff's Office, Florence, Arizona, Sheriff Babbo said this: "Secure border first, or you will repeat history." Quote, Pinal County Sheriff Barbo announced his opposition to the proposed immigration reform offered by the so-called Gang of Eight, officially titled the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. Senator Sheriff Barbo said, quote, "We must secure the border first. Prior to any discussion of green cards and path to citizenship offered to nearly 20 million illegals and their families, this plan gives everything to President Obama up front, while border security is promised once again on the back end. We are about to repeat history when in 1986 President Amnesty gave amnesty to 2 million illegals. Now the stakes are far higher, yet it seems that we haven't learned our lesson. The failure to secure the border after the Reagan amnesty got us to where we are today, with 11 to 20 million illegals in our country. This plan will repeat history, close quote. I think he's exactly right about that. Chris Kaine, the head of the ICE union, is so outspoken about this. He's testified before the House. He's had press conferences here that I participated with him. He's warned that this will make America less secure, not more secure. He warns that it makes the ability of the ICE agents already handicapped even more problematic. He says that the bill gives to the Secretary, essentially, he says, more discretion to violate the law than they're using today. And in fact, the orders and directives and policies they're giving to the street officers, the ICE officers, about how to do their job are currently in direct violation of the law. This bill ratifies that by explicitly giving statutory authority to the Secretary to make all kinds of waivers for other matters. That's not a way to give confidence to America. Mr. President, I don't know what our time is. I see no one else on the floor. I don't want to take anybody else's time, but if I yielded the floor, I guess their time would run against them anyway.
There are 2 minutes remaining.
2 minutes.
On the opponent's side.
Our law enforcement officers are really frustrated. So you've got three major law enforcement groups. The Border Patrol, which was given considerable funding after the failure of the 2006 and 2007 comprehensive immigration bill, and they've enhanced their efforts as a result of that. But we still are not where we need to be at the border. Indeed, since the announcement of this possible amnesty, illegal entries have increased significantly at our borders. The number of people arrested is considerably higher this year than last year. And 55,000 of the 90,000 people, 90,000 that have been arrested this year since January were not from Mexico, and this was primarily on the Mexican border, but from other countries, and some of them from countries that have a history of terrorism. And Senator Kaine has talked about that previously. So we've gotten a surge of it happening, and they're concerned about it and protecting their officers. The customs and the citizenship and immigration officers, these are the people that would process the amnesty claims and the request to be treated as lawful residents that will occur after this bill passes, who deal with the people who make application to come to the United States and process the pathway to citizenship for everybody. They have explicitly voted and opposed this legislation. They say it does not work, and I just read a quote from the head of their union as to why it won't work. The ICE officers who deal with all the interior enforcement, they apprehend people who've been convicted of crimes that are in the state and local jails, who are non-citizens, who are illegally here, and they're supposed to deport them. They have been consistently out front pointing out how they have been constricted in their ability to do their job, and that if this bill passes and the vast majority of those here illegally are legalized, they're not in the future going to be placed in a position where they can do their job. They're not going to be placed in a position that they can effectively manage the interior enforcement in America. And they say the bill will make us less secure, not more secure. How wrong a direction could that be? So those are the things that we've got to get a grip on here. That's why the legislation cannot become law. And I don't think it won't become law as it's written today. That's for sure. One way or the other, it will not become law because it's fatally flawed. Mr. President, I thank the chair and have the opportunity to share these remarks as we begin the discussion on the great issue of our time, one of the great issues of our time, immigration. It's got to be done right. The American people rightly, as are these law officers, concerned that we are about to do another 1986, that we're going to give immediately lawful status to millions of people who came illegally, and we promise that we'll enforce the law in the future. But when you read the bill, you can see that won't happen. And we'll be sending another message worldwide that the United States is such that if you can just get into our country illegally and hold on for long enough, you too will be the beneficiary of the third major amnesty that occurs. And so that's where we are. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor. Mr. President, I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator Sessions, who we heard speak for about an hour on the Senate floor, is managing the immigration bill for the Republicans. The bill that he's been pointing to on the desk is 1,000 pages long. The chamber is expected to debate whether to move forward with the bill and hold a procedural vote this afternoon.
I'm happy to be here on the floor today as we get ready to go on the immigration bill and we start to debate it. And so I wanted to lay out a couple points as we move forward on this debate, which I fully anticipate we'll get to, and we need to as a country, for actually many of the reasons that my colleague from Alabama and others have raised because of these problems that we face with regards to our immigration system here in the country. So let's just take a step back and kind of analyze this issue a little bit. For the people that are tuning into it for the first time, maybe are here visiting Washington and are listening to the talk about it, and kind of a fundamental understanding of what we are addressing here. Let's begin by saying the obvious, and that is all Americans understand immigration because it's their story. Whether it's you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, one of the defining characteristics of the United States of America is that it is literally a collection of people from all over the world, or the descendants of people from all over the world, that have come here in search of a better life. I think it's important to understand why that distinguishes us from the rest of the world. The rest of the world's attitude throughout human history, basically, if you look at the countries that have been organized throughout human history, the nation states, all these countries have largely been organized because people had a common ethnicity or a common race, or they came from the same tribe or the same family clan or what have you. The U.S. is very different. The U.S. was actually founded on the notion that what we want is we're going to create a country here that believes fundamentally in the God-given right of every single human being to go as far as their talent will take you, as far as your talent and your work will take you. Now, you may say that, well, people like me that have been born and raised here our entire lives, sometimes we take that for granted. But I want you to understand that throughout all human history, that's a rarity. In fact, throughout human history, what people have been told by their leaders is, you can only go so far in life because that's what your parents did, that's where your family comes from, and so that's all you are allowed to do. But we were different, and thank God we were. What we said is, we don't care how poor you were the day you were born. It doesn't matter to us that your parents weren't well-connected and well-heeled. We don't even care that you were born in another country. If you have a really good idea, you really want to work hard, if you really want to build a better life for yourself, we want you. We want you. And that's been the history of the United States, a collection of go-getters from all over the world who have come here and built this extraordinary country. And the influence that this country's had, not just on human history, but even to modern day, is unbelievable, culturally, economically, in terms of ensuring peace, especially in the aftermath of World War II. All of it is the result of this particular reality about who we are as a people and as a nation. We have always had immigration, and we will always need immigration to keep the nature and the essence of who we are as a people. But times change, and the immigration system has to change with those times. In essence, the immigration system we had 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people forget this. What was the immigration system of the United States? Not so long ago, here was the immigration system of the United States. If you got here, you got to stay. If you made that dangerous voyage across the Atlantic, If you found your way to this country, you would be processed at Ellis Island or somewhere else, and you got to stay. We can't afford that anymore. No one's asking for that. We have to have a controlled system of immigration, especially in the 21st century, that measures who's coming, why they're here, who they are. Now, that may not be the way it worked 100 years ago or 80 years ago, but that's the way it has to work now in the 21st century. We understand that. Adding to that, by the way, is the reality that the 21st century is so different from the 20th. We are actively engaged in global competition. Now, it wasn't so long ago, like when my parents came in 1956, the U.S. was still a national economy. The people you traded with in your country, probably in your own state or in your own community. No more. Today, we are actively involved in global competition for business, for clients, and for talent. So we have to understand that our immigration system has to reflect that. The way people immigrate, and who immigrates here now, has to reflect the 21st century reality, which is reason number one why this country needs immigration reform. All the attention is being paid to illegal immigration, and look, that's a serious problem, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But issue number one, the fundamental reason why we have to do immigration reform is because we do not have a 21st century immigration system. Our immigration system today is largely built on the idea that if you have a relative living here, it's easier for you to come than if you have a special skill or talent that you're offering to the country than contribute. We don't have a merit-based system. We have a family-based system. And I say that as someone whose family came on a family-based system. My parents came here because my mom's sister claimed her in 1956. But the country is so different. The world is so different. So different from 2006, not to mention 1956. And our immigration system has to reflect that. The problem is we have a broken legal immigration system. It does not reflect the realities of the 21st century. And the result is that even if we didn't have a single illegal immigrant in the United States, we should be on the floor of the Senate debating immigration reform because we must modernize our legal immigration system. And that, as much as anything else, is a reason why my colleagues should be excited about the opportunity to have this debate. Because we have to modernize our legal immigration system so that it is a benefit to our country. And I give this anecdote because I think it's appropriate. You know, we're in the NBA Finals, which, by the way, the Miami Heat won Game 2 in resounding fashion. And we're very happy about that. We'll see what happens tonight. But imagine for a second if there was now the hottest basketball player in the country, played at some college in the United States, 6'10", never misses a shot, just an unbelievable player. Do you think in your wildest dreams that we would ever let that person go play in Italy or Spain or some other country? There is no way in the world that we are going to allow the best basketball player in the world, no matter where they're born from, no matter where they came from, no matter their immigration status, there is no way in the world that we're going to let a future NBA star leave the United States and go play basketball in some other country, in a European league or the Greek league or whatever. They're going to stay here. And so my question to you is, if that's how we approach sports, which is important, I guess, but it's a game, shouldn't that be the way we approach our economy? Should we be deporting the best graduates at some of our universities, world-class physicists and scientists and people in technology and engineering and math? And yet that's the way functionally our immigration system works right now. And I'm not making this up. We've heard the testimony. We have heard the people that come into our offices. There isn't a member in this office who hasn't had a meeting in their office or their staff hasn't with someone from the tech community that will come to you and say, we are going to college campuses, we are making job offers to the best and brightest, and we can't keep them here, not because they don't want to stay here, not because they're not qualified, not because we don't have a job opening, but because we can't get them a green card or a legal status. And so they are learning at our universities at the expense of the American taxpayer, and then they are leaving the United States to compete against us. That makes no sense. Nor does, by the way, the system of getting workers for agriculture, which I would argue, to many respects, is skilled labor. And if you don't believe me, go watch some of these people in the field as they work and the work that they do. But American agriculture, you talk about energy security. You want to cripple a country, cripple their food security, cripple their agricultural security. Agriculture is an important industry in most of the states in this country, and certainly for the United States of America. That industry depends on a workforce. And there is a demand for labor in that workforce. And the fact is, and has been for over 100 years, that the only way to fully fill all the jobs available in agriculture is through seasonal and temporary labor from abroad. There is a real demand for that labor. And there is a real supply of people that want to do that labor. And supply and demand will always meet. But because we do not have a functional legal immigration system that allows the supply of foreign workers to meet the demand of domestic jobs and agriculture. Supply and demand are meeting, but they are meeting in a chaotic and broken way. That needs to be reformed, as well as a bunch of other things. I mean, the immigration system is very bureaucratic and complicated. In fact, our broken legal immigration system is one of the leading contributors to illegal immigration. Over 40% of the people in this country illegally today came legally. They didn't jump a fence. They didn't sneak in. They came on some sort of temporary visa and they overstayed it. And one of the leading reasons why they overstay is they think it's too costly, too time-consuming, and too bureaucratic to come back again legally in the future. So I guess my point is, even if we didn't have a single illegal immigrant in the U.S., we need to do immigration reform because we must modernize our legal immigration system and it must reflect the 21st century. The second point that I would make to you is our immigration laws are only as good as our ability to enforce them. And we don't have enforcement mechanisms that work. All the attention is paid to the border, and it should be, because the border is not just an immigration issue, it is a national security issue. That means the same routes that are used to smuggle in immigrants can be used to smuggle in weapons and terrorists and other things, and drugs. So we must secure the border. And that's not easy to do because there is no such thing as one border. The border is broken up into about 9 different sectors. Some are doing much better than they ever have. Others are not doing very well at all. We must secure the border of the United States for national security reasons as well as immigration reasons. And I know that it's hard to do it, and I know there's been efforts in the past that have failed, but I'm telling you that I refuse to accept the idea that the most powerful country on earth, the nation that put a man on the moon, is incapable of securing its own border. Our sovereignty is at stake in terms of border security. Border security is not an anti-immigration or an anti-immigrant measure. It is an important national security measure, but it is also an important defense of our sovereignty. And we must protect our borders. Likewise, we have to understand that even if you protect your borders, the magnet that's bringing people to the United States is employment. And so we have to create a system, which we are capable of doing in the 21st century. We must create a system that allows employers to verify that the person that they are hiring is legally here. Hence all this talk of E-Verify. And last but not least, because 40% of the people that are here illegally entered legally, we have to have a system that tracks when visitors enter and when they leave. Now, my colleagues will tell you that's already required by law, and it is. The problem is that the way it's required right now will never work, and that's why this bill deals with that. We have to have a system so when you're visiting the United States on a temporary visa, as a tourist, on business, what it may be, we track you. You log in when you come in, and you log in when you leave. Every hotel in America knows when their guests come in and when they leave. Every hotel in America knows that. Multiple businesses track people when they come in and when they leave. We do this every single day as a matter of routine in our lives. The federal government should be able to do that, and it must do that. And this bill requires that they do that. And it creates a real incentive to do that, and I'll talk about it in a moment. But basically the incentive is that the green card process for those who are illegally in this country, that doesn't start until that system is fully in place. By the way, it also doesn't start until E-Verify is fully in place. These are significant security measures that we must undertake. When you hear people say, well, the bill weakens the status quo and the law, the problem is that the status quo isn't working. There's a reason why we have 11 million people here illegally, and it's because the status quo, the current law, there's a flaw in it. There's a flaw in E-Verify. The flaw in E-Verify is you basically show up at your employer, you show them a Social Security card. It may not be your Social Security card, but that's all you have to show them. It's happening all the time. People are either falsifying the document or borrowing someone else's, and they're using someone else's legal documentation to find a job. We have to create a new E-Verify, one that allows us to verify that the person holding that card is actually that person. Otherwise, arguing in favor of the status quo is arguing in favor of continuing the fraud. So we've got to stop that from happening. So we have to have security elements as part of this bill. Border security, E-Verify, and entry-exit tracking. The last issue, and it's the one that gets all the attention, is what to do with the people that are here illegally now. And let me begin by saying to you that I don't know anyone who's happy about the fact that we have approximately 10.5 to 11 million human beings living in the United States illegally. I would also remind you that every one of their stories is different, and I would caution people not to lump them all into one basket because they're all very different. Some came legally and overstayed, Others entered illegally and have been here ever since. Some came in as very young children, didn't even know they're illegal until they try to go to college. The point is there's real diversity in that group of people. So we have three options. Option number one is we can ignore it, leave it the way it is, pretend it's not there. And I think if this bill fails or efforts like it fail, that's exactly what we'll have. And for those who oppose amnesty, I would tell you that is de facto amnesty. De facto amnesty is having 11 million people living among you illegally. The only consequence to it is they don't have documentation. But obviously they're working somewhere because they're providing for their families. They don't qualify for any federal benefits. They're all around us everywhere you look, whether you know it or not. They're here. Most have been here for longer than a decade. We can ignore it, but if we do, if we leave it in place, if we do nothing, if this bill fails and we do nothing, that's de facto amnesty. The second option is we can make life miserable on them. We can basically put E-Verify in place, continue to secure the borders, and make life so tough on people that they'll just leave on their own. I don't think that's a practical approach. I don't think it works. I don't think most Americans would tolerate what we would have to do in order for that to happen. I don't think most Americans would tolerate the humanitarian costs of approaching it that way. And at the end of the day, I still think many won't leave anyway. They'll figure out a way to survive and endure. I don't think that's a practical approach. If someone else thinks it's a practical approach, I would encourage them to come to the floor and convince me otherwise. Come here and explain to us why we should try to do that. I haven't heard anyone make that argument. I'm not saying anyone is, which proves my point. So what's the third option? The third option is to deal with it. To deal with it in a way that's reasonable and compassionate, but also in a way that's responsible and good for the country. And that's what we've endeavored to do as part of this bill. So let's be clear what this bill does. This bill, the first and foremost thing that it does is it says to the people that are here illegally, come forward. We have a process for you that you're going to have to undergo if you want to be in this country legally. And here's what that process is. Number one, you're going to have to undergo a background check. They're going to have to fingerprint you. You're going to have to undergo a background check for national security and for crimes. If you've committed serious crimes, you're not going to qualify for this legalization. You're going to have to pay an application fee. You're going to have to pay a fine because that's a consequence of having violated our immigration laws. When I hear the word amnesty used, it reminds me amnesty means the forgiveness of something. We've seen amnesties all the time. I was recently in the great state of Hawaii. We had a great visit there on a personal visit. They have a box called an amnesty box. It allows you, when you get off the airplane, if you have any banned agriculture, plants, fruits, whatever, to put it in the bucket, no questions asked. That's amnesty. Amnesty is turn it in and nothing will happen to you, no price to pay. That's not what this bill does. This bill says come forward and you're going to have to undergo a background check for national security, a background check for crimes. You're going to have to pay a fine. You're going to have to pay an application fee. You're going to have to get gainfully employed and start paying taxes, and you're not going to qualify for any federal benefits. No Obamacare, no food stamps, no welfare, nothing. And that's all you're going to be able to have for 10 years. Which leads me to my second point about the legalization. There's this notion out there that this is permanent legalization, that once you get this, you're legal forever. Not true. This is, like all other non-immigrant visas, this is renewable. Under the program we envision in this bill, every 6 years, you're going to have to come forward and reapply. Every 6 years, you're going to have to come forward and undergo all the same things over again. Another fine, another application fee, another background check. And in fact, when you go renew it the first time, you're going to have to prove that you've been gainfully employed and paying taxes for the previous 6 years. The legalization that people are going to be able to get, the so-called RPI, Registered Provisional Immigrant, the key word there is provisional. It is not permanent. And there are people that are going to qualify for RPI at the beginning who, when it comes time to renew, aren't going to qualify because they weren't gainfully employed and paying taxes, because they committed a crime, because they can't pay the fine. That's going to happen. We don't think it will be prevalent, but it will happen. It is not permanent. It is provisional. The third aspect of it is that once you have been in RPI for 10 full years, after you have been in RPI for 10 full years, which means the first 6 years, and then you reapplied and qualified, and you've been in it another 4 years, then here's the only thing that happens. The only thing that happens is that you are now qualified to, you are eligible to apply for a green card. It doesn't mean on the 10th year anniversary of getting RPI, you show up at some office and say, I'm here, give me my green card. That's not true. You have to apply for it. You have to undergo the same green card process with all the same checks and balances. And I filed an amendment to improve it even further. I'm saying that when you apply for that green card after the 10-year period and more has expired, you're going to have to prove that you're proficient in English, because I think assimilation is important. Because I think assimilating into America's society is important. Because I think learning English is not just important for assimilation, it's important for economic success. You cannot flourish in our economy, you cannot flourish in our country if you're not proficient in English. And we're going to require that at the green card stage. Now, what's the debate going to be about here over the next few weeks? Well, a couple things are going to have to happen. First, like any other bill, there's some technical changes that are going to have to be made, and those will be made. I think there'll be improvements to the bill on other issues, like what I've just talked about, this amendment that I have to make the English proficiency required at the green card stage. Then I think we're going to move on and have a debate about the costs of this bill and ensuring that we truly tighten this. Because, look, the American people are very generous and open, especially through a process like this, but they want to make sure this isn't costing the American taxpayer. So we're going to really have to make sure that people aren't qualifying for these federal benefits. We have to really make sure that people that have violated our immigration law, one of the consequences of that is that they are not a burden on the American taxpayer. And if you talk to many of these immigrant groups and the immigrants themselves, they'll tell you that's not a problem. That's not what we're here for. Good. Because you're not going to qualify for those things, and we're going to make that even clearer in some of the amendments that Senator Hatch and others are working on. And then I think we have to get to the final point, and that's the security elements of this bill. Now, I personally believe that more than half of my colleagues on the Republican side, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, want to vote for an immigration bill. They want to modernize our legal immigration system, they want to improve our enforcement mechanisms, and they want to deal with the 11 million people that are here illegally. But they are only willing to do that if they could go back to their folks back at home and say, we took steps in this bill to make sure this will never happen again. We didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. This isn't going to happen again. That's going to be the key to this bill passing. And I think that we can do that. And that's in our principles, by the way. The guiding principles before this bill was unveiled talked about border security. One of the ways I think we can improve that is by not leaving the border and fence plan to chance. Let's not leave it to the Department of Homeland Security. One of the objections we've heard from opponents of the bill is, we don't trust Homeland Security to come up with a plan that works. Fine. Then let's put it in the bill. Let's put the specific plan in the bill, the number of fences, the amount of technology. Let's mandate it in the bill so that we're not leaving it to guesswork. So that when you vote for this bill, you are voting for a specific security plan. I've heard people say, we think the E-Verify portion should be improved. Let's fix it now. Let's put it in the bill. We think the entry-exit tracking system can be improved. Let's put it in the bill. So that when you vote for this bill, you're also voting for a plan on those things. That's important. And that's not unreasonable. I want you to think about this for a second. The immigrant who is illegally here comes forward. They get legalized through this pretty difficult process. They are now here legally. They've qualified because they've met these conditions. They're now here legally. They are working. They are paying taxes. They're not in the shadows anymore. But before we can move to a green card, which is permanent residency, all we're asking for is that we ensure that this never happens again. That is not an unreasonable request. And not only do I not think that's an unreasonable request, I think that that is a very responsible request. Because none of us want to be here 5 years from now or 10 years from now saying, boy, they really messed up in 2013. We've got to do this all over again. None of us want to be here 5 years from now facing 5 million illegal immigrants more, another wave of illegal immigration. We can get that right. We can get it right in this bill. And if that happens, I believe this legislation will pass in a historic way out of this chamber. And it strengthens the chances that it could pass in the House and be signed by the President. And that's the opportunity we have to get something like this right. Now, I could go on and talk to you about the economic benefits of legal immigration reform and what that will mean for our economy. We'll have plenty of time to have that conversation. Trust me when I tell you, and I think we'll work on it to convince you, it will be a net positive for America to have a legal immigration system that works. And that's why this debate is so important. I think we can do something here that's good for the country and responsible and once and for all solve this problem so we don't have to continue to deal with it, so it doesn't continue to hold us back. So we, a nation of immigrants, built on a heritage of legal immigration, could have a legal immigration system that works, that we can be proud of, that helps our country, that takes this issue off the table, that gets rid of de facto amnesty, that protects our sovereignty and our borders and the security of our people. And that's what we have a chance to do here. To the opponents of the legislation, I would say, look, I respect your views very much. I do. And I think you raise very valid concerns, which we have attempted to address in this bill and in which we will continue to address in this bill. I'm not one of those take-it-or-leave-it people with regards to legislation. I always think that no matter what idea I have, the more people are exposed to it, the more input I get, the more suggestions I get, the better we can make it. And ultimately, that's what I'm interested in being a part of. I'm not interested in being part of passing a bill as a talking point or a messaging point, nor am I interested in the political calculations of this issue. What I'm personally interested in is solving a problem that's hurting America, and that's how I'll close. That's why I'm passionate about this. The reason why I'm passionate about this issue is because this thing is hurting America. The fact that we have 11 million people living here, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they are, they're not paying taxes, they're not incorporated into our economy, that's hurting America. It's bad for them, but it's really bad for our country. The fact that we can't enforce our immigration laws because the systems we have in place don't work, that's bad for America. The fact that we have a legal immigration system that hurts our economy and hurts our future, that's bad for America. What we have today in immigration in America is bad. It doesn't work for anyone unless you're a human trafficker or someone who is benefiting at the expense of cheap illegal labor. Who else is being helped by the status quo? Who else likes what we have right now? The answer is nobody. And leaving this in place is not an alternative. It is not an option. This is the problem that's hurting our country. And the only way I know how to solve a problem is to get involved in trying to solve it. That's why I came here. I didn't come to the Senate to sign on to a bunch of letters and give a speech once a week on the floor. I came here because I believe I know with all my heart that what we have here is a unique, exceptional, and special place. But to keep it that way requires us to take seriously not just our constitutional charge, but take seriously the opportunity we have to solve historic problems in a historic way. And I think this bill, done right, gives us the opportunity to do that. And I look forward to the opportunity to be a part of it. And I hope my colleagues, those who are open-minded about it, will remain open-minded as we work to improve this product and give the American people something that helps our country, solves our problem, and makes us all proud. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Virginia.
I ask unanimous consent that I be able to deliver a floor speech on immigration reform in Spanish.
Without objection.
I will provide a translation of my remarks in Spanish and in English for the congressional record. El Senado ha comenzado un debate histórico sobre una reforma migratoria comprensiva. Hemos tenido y continuaremos a tener horas para debatir este asunto. Creo que es apropiado que tome unos pocos minutos para explicar